Thank you so much, team, for being here. Hello, welcome to what is the latest installment of the SEDC Professional Development Initiative. So if you've been on these in the past, you know this is a 2-year, 25-30 session educational program meant to enhance professional capacity to accelerate economic development in the American South. So I always love to say this, you all know this, but within our network, just last year, we did over $200 billion in deals that will lead to 250,000 new American jobs. We're the world's third largest equivalent economy, and we are equally poised to sustain, perpetuate, and accelerate that type of success because within SEDC we love to say are the best economic developers. That's true, deploying the best and most strategic economic development strategy. So today, we're going to talk about an important piece of this. You know this, but a massive advantage that we have is our logistical advantage in the great rail partners that we have serving within SEDC and within our region. So that's what we are here to talk about today. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being part of SEDC. The staff here is really honored to be a small part of what is a big team. So welcome to the Railroading for Economic Developers webinar led by our great friend Brian Gwynn of Norfolk Southern. So Brian doesn't really need any introduction. Most of us know him or you've worked closely with him, but in case you are new to SEDC, I want to read Brian's bio and then we'll turn the floor to him. So Brian is currently responsible for managing all economic development efforts for Norfolk Southern in the state of South Carolina. He assists the state and many regional and county level economic development teams to assist in the location of rail-served industries along Norfolk Southern's line. To this end, he is involved in developing greenfield locations for sites and industrial parks and in the active recruitment and management of projects from their inception through construction and activation. He joined NS in 1998 after graduating from Clemson. He has over 20 years experience at NS working in the automotive group managing inbound and outbound logistics projects with large automotive manufacturers. He also spent time as a supply chain management consultant for Modalogistics, Norfolk Southern supply chain management and optimization consultancy. While working at NS, Brian obtained an MBA in 2005 from the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg. Brian is a 2009 graduate of Leadership South Carolina, former board member of SCADA, that's the association in South Carolina, a current board member of South Carolina Logistics, and current a current board member for SEDC, and is set to take over our chairmanship in just a few months. So he currently resides in Columbia, South Carolina. So a little bit of housekeeping here. Brian will be available for questions after this, so be thinking of those. You can pop those in the chat and we'll get to those. Also, please feel free to turn your camera on at the end of this and ask a question. We'd love to see you, love to take your questions here. So don't forget to mute your microphones if you haven't already, and we're happy to turn the floor over to Brian. Thank you, sir. You're always so generous with your time and talent, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt. I really do appreciate that, and appreciate everybody hopping on today to talk about a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Been doing economic development with Norfolk Southern since 2006 in South Carolina. So been doing it for a while. Tried to put together a mishmash of presentations here that can hopefully give you guys a picture into the world of the railroad and give you an idea and a structure. So I do have the couple of ubiquitous little, well, there we go. This is our railroad today. It's about 19,000 miles in 22 states. We reach about 50% of the US population, serve every port on the East Coast. And I got a brief video here I'm going to show y'all, and hopefully this works. We teed it up and hopefully it happens.
This is the sound of America's story, the sound of opportunity. Centuries of growth choreographed to the tune of the low rumble of a locomotive. The sounds of our past are the same sounds of our future, and Norfolk Southern is leading the way. 60% of the U.S. population lives on our network, and we directly touch more than half of U.S. manufacturing and industrial warehouses. We've spent decades solidifying partnerships to serve the fastest growing segments of the U.S. economy. By rail, we have more than 250 short line partnerships, more than any other Class 1 railroad, including the best routes between the Southeast and the Southwest, thanks to our Western partners. We're at the ports, too, the East Coast, the Great Lakes, and the Gulf of Mexico, allowing for global reach and offering direct access to some of the largest inland population centers, like Atlanta and Chicago. But it's not just about being in the right place. It's about having the right partners, too, like J.B. Hunt and the Hub Group, along with an enviable customer base built on long-standing relationships and a deep understanding of their business. We compete against the highway for a share of our customers' flexible freight, and we know by offering a simple, reliable, and efficient experience for them, we will unlock the potential of our remarkable network. We're invested in our customers' success, and they're invested in ours. There are several market forces working in our favor. The flexible freight market is poised for robust growth, thanks to three primary drivers. First, e-commerce. Your UPS package or your latest Amazon delivery arrives in a van. But Amazon and UPS are two of our biggest customers because that van was loaded up at a warehouse filled with packages that got there by rail. Warehouse capacity across our network has exploded over the last 20 years. To keep up with demand, the country will need an additional 330 million square feet of warehouse space for online fulfillment in the next 3 years. That's like adding another Chicagoland of warehouse capacity. At the same time, more customers are positioning their inventory closer to their end consumers. But rail isn't just efficient, it's also sustainable, and that's the second economic trend favoring highway to rail conversion. 40 of our largest customers have set science-based targets for carbon reduction, and we're helping them reach those goals. To get 300 truckloads of freight from Chicago to New Jersey, you could save nearly 80% on carbon emissions by loading all of that onto a train, not to mention preventing wear and tear and congestion on public roads. Then there's onshoring, the third economic trend boosting highway to rail conversion. Norfolk Southern has built the best industrial development team in the industry, along with superior partnerships with local economic development agencies. Already, there are more than 800 development-ready industrial sites and 250 rail-to-truck transload facilities on our network. More than 1,000 sites, and every one of them is an opportunity. The projects we're working on right now could add up to investments that are greater than the last 10 years combined. The potential is obvious, and we know turning potential into reality is a matter of balancing reliable and resilient service, a continued focus on productivity, and expanding opportunities for smart and sustainable growth. Norfolk Southern helped build our country, and now we're building speed toward its future.
So that's just kind of a blip that we prepared for our investor day here earlier this year, and I thought everybody might get a little bit of use out of that. So I'm going to talk just a little bit at a high level about the railroad industry and kind of the structure of that industry. The railroad industry is made up of today what we might call 7 Class 1 railroads. That doesn't account for Amtrak, but essentially today you have Norfolk Southern and CSX. Those are the eastern railroads, and Union Pacific and BNSF. Those are the western roads, and essentially they meet at the Mississippi River. And then you have 2 large Canadian railroads, Canadian National, that has operations across Canada, but they also reach down into the kind of the Mississippi area down through the center part of the country and go all the way down into Mobile and New Orleans. And then you have the CPKC, which is the Canadian Pacific, which recently purchased the Kansas City Southern. So that railroad is in Canada, also in the United States, but when they purchased KCS, they got a huge rail presence down in Mexico. And then in Mexico itself, you also have another railroad called Grupo Mexico and that is the FXE, and they own a railroad in Florida. It's important because the railroad industry in North America is interconnected. You can ship a rail car from Canada to Mexico and back and forth, and never, take that rail car off of the rails. Up until 1982, the railroad was completely regulated by the government, and the Staggers Act of '82 deregulated that. Most of the rail lines in the United States are owned, operated, and maintained by private entities or publicly traded corporations. That's very different than overseas. When we deal with a lot of FDI, foreign companies, that's usually something we oftentimes have to explain. There's been a tremendous amount of consolidation over the years. In 1900, there were 132 Class I railroads. Like I said, today there's 7. But then there are a whole bunch of regional and short line railroads out there, a little over 600 of them. So last year, just the Class I's alone was about $107 billion industry, with about 150,000 track miles. Those 600 short line railroads generated about 4.6 billion and another 47,500 miles. And then you see Amtrak there. They're, of course, a federally owned entity. They operate on mostly Class I railroads. They do own a small amount of rail lines up in the Northeast. Within the SEDC territory, we actually are very blessed to have a lot of rail lines. There's 261 short lines in the SEDC territory, and approximately, which is about 43% of the total. And then we have about 39,000 track miles in the SEDC territory, about 45% of what is in the United States. So that's kind of a look into what the rail industry looks like. I'm going to talk a little bit now about our service products, how we offer our services, and how they really look. And this really breaks down into really 2 areas. You have direct rail service and intermodal service. So I'm going to go into each one of those and explain a little bit about what the differences are between the 2. Direct rail service is a door-to-door product, meaning the rail car is shipped from one origin directly to the destination. For the most part, it moves in scheduled trains, and it's very commodity specific. The industries on either end will have a dedicated rail spur. In fact, most economic development projects that railroads work on are for direct rail service. So this is your plastic resin manufacturer, the cold storage warehouse, those types of companies. And by having that rail directly on their site, they avoid having to move that product at all by truck. So to get it from their building to another, essentially we have a local, what we call a local, that goes out, picks the product up from the shipper, and it brings it back to a distribution yard. You have a road train that operates between distribution yards to the classification yards. And then you generally have another road train out of there to a distribution yard, and then a local delivery out to the receiver. You will sometimes hear this called manifest service. You might hear it called carload service. Some people will say single car service. This is the bread and butter, in my opinion, of the railroads. Just to give you an idea of that and some of the equipment we do with that, we move a lot of ag products. So those can move in covered hopper cars. That's the one you see there on the top left of your screen. Tank cars. Forest products can move in a center beam. That's the middle one there on your left. That's a very customized car for shipping lumber. Box cars. Most people know what a box car is. That's right there in the middle. And then we also ship a lot of consumer products. So imagine things like cold storage rail cars that ship potatoes and other things, but also wine and beer. A lot of people don't know, but basically almost all Corona beer in the that moves from Mexico into the United States moves by rail. We also move a lot of automotive. So finished vehicles, including EVs, which is a very fast growing part of our business. But we also move auto parts. So engines, transmissions, frames, stampings, things of that nature. And then our chemical business, which is a very broad business. And that's a big category that covers a lot of different things, from, hazardous materials to inorganic chemicals to organic chemicals to municipal solid waste. A lot of different things. Plastics fall under that. So crude oil and a lot of other things. Our coal business, there is still a coal business out there. It is mostly today metallurgical coal that goes into steel production, but also there's a good amount of still thermal coal, which is steam coal that goes into coal-fired power plants. There have been a number of them shut down, and there probably will continue to be some shut down. We also, though, export a lot of this. So exports of thermal coal and metallurgical coal out of the East Coast. Norfolk Southern owns one of the largest coal terminals in North America, which is in Lambert's Point, which is in Norfolk, Virginia. We have a very extensive metals and construction markets. All the railroads participate in all of these. These are things like rock and cement and coils of steel and scrap metal. These are fit into that market segment. And the last one is intermodal, and I'll get into that a little more here, but basically intermodal has two different networks. There's a domestic network and an international network. The international network is 20-foot and 40-foot boxes that are coming into the ports or going out of the ports, and they connect directly from the port to an inland terminal. And then there's a domestic network, which is our partners such as J.B. Hunt and Hub, UPS, FedEx, that ship from a single origin terminal to a destination terminal. When you think of intermodal, it's important to think of containers, shipping containers. I have sat in many a meeting with a company and heard their volume numbers and everything. And after some conversations, we realized, no, they're not talking about rail cars onto their site. They're really talking about containers. So it's important to have that conversation on the front end, because frankly, if somebody just wants to move shipping containers, they don't need a rail serve site. And we certainly want to save the rail serve sites for companies that are going to need actually to use rail. So it's important to figure that out at the beginning. When you hear intermodal, you got to think multimodal. So that could be rail to truck, truck to rail, from a ship to a truck, from a ship to a rail. This is just the NS network. There's obviously every other railroad. CSX has a network similar to this, so does BN and UP, and the Canadian railroads as well. Most of these terminals are owned and operated by the railroads. There is a evolving area of inland ports. We have one of those in Greer, South Carolina, that is actually owned by the South Carolina State Ports Authority. The GPA, Georgia Port Authority, has one up in Chatsworth, Georgia. VPA, Virginia Port Authority, has one in Front Royal, Virginia. So there are other facilities out there that is a somewhat growing area of the intermodal market. The railroads wholesale that business. So we price that from terminal to terminal, and then we sell that service to a intermodal marketing company, or IMC, like Hub Group, or a trucking company like JB Hunt, and there's a lot of other ones out there. So generally, they have the relationship with what we call the BCO, or the beneficial cargo owner. Intermodal moves in dedicated intermodal trains, and it's point to point. So these trains do not get stuck in a yard and get switched out. They generally are going straight from one terminal to the other terminal. When you're dealing with a client that does need intermodal, it's important to have proximity to that intermodal facility, because a large part of the cost of intermodal is the drayage move from the plant directly to the facility. So the closer they are to that intermodal facility, the closer your site is to that intermodal facility, the more cost effective your supply chain is going to be. And that will give your site an advantage over other sites that are further from an intermodal facility, if that is a component that the customer is seeking. Another part of rail service, and this doesn't get talked about nearly enough, is transload, or bulk transfer. Just because somebody may not be on rail, or maybe they're looking for a site and they are looking at a building that maybe is not on rail, it doesn't mean they can't take advantage of the economics of rail. So it's important when you have almost any project to talk to your allies at the railroads and talk to them about projects that don't just have a rail component, because there might be an opportunity to market a transload facility. So all the railroads operate and own transload facilities. And so these are used mostly for things like bulk products, such as plastics and flour and liquids like ethanol and things like that. So these rail cars come in, they're transloaded to a truck, and then it's delivered to their facility. So there's no need to have rail on site. It's generally for somebody that has a lower volume. It's obviously a little bit more expensive than your direct rail service, but it's certainly a lot cheaper than trucking. So it's a good option for some customers. I want to talk a little bit now about the RFP and site visit. I've been on hundreds of site visits and dealt with many different RFPs and that run the gamut. And these are just kind of lessons learned and ideas for each of you to think about in your day and when you're looking at projects and how you might be able to advance your site into a project. So the process Norfolk Southern really uses is we spend a lot of time on the front end identifying sites and knowing what is out there. Rail serve sites are at a premium. They are hard to find in many cases. We are looking every day now at sites that are not even along the rail line. So we have to think about that. We do a lot of conceptual analysis and operations planning. I'll get into some of the examples that we do of that. And we'll get into cost projections and maybe even a logistics evaluation. And then we actually manage that process from the time of the announcement all the way until the first rail car moves. These are some of I put together this list of questions, and it's rather wordy, I know, but this was just an idea, when you're sitting down with your prospect, these are questions you should be asking of the railroad to learn about what are some things that you need to know from the railroad about your site. So does the site even have a mainline switch? Is there one there? If it is it active? Because sometimes they've been there for a long time and they're not active. It may not have a mainline switch. A lot of sites don't. A lot of the railroads have been pulling old switches, and you may have to have one installed. Can it even be installed at that location? Just because the rail line may be there doesn't necessarily mean you can put a switch there. For instance, you can't put a switch in a curve. So if your site is entirely inside of a curve, the railroad may have to go back to the nearest point of tangent track, meaning straight track, to install that switch to get to your location. That may be feasible and it may not be feasible. Also, you would want to look at the frequency of service. So how often will the railroad serve my site? There are all kinds of rail lines throughout this country. Some of them may only offer 2-day-a-week service. Some of them may offer 3-day-a-week, 5-day a week, 7-day a week, and that could significantly impact the desirability of one site versus another one. In many cases, if it's less days, you can work through that. It may involve though building a little bit more rail on the site so that they can keep that inventory there. Is the site on a class 1 or a short line? That's a big thing to understand. A lot of people want to talk about dual rail. If it's a short line, does it interconnect with other class 1s? And how frequently are those interchanges? So those are really important questions to ask. It's important to also, there are, I call it a needle in a haystack sites out there where you may find 2 class 1s that serve a site. It does exist. They're very hard to find, and there's very few of them out there. But those would be what I would call true dual rail, but those are few and far between these days. Most dual rail sites are through the facilitation of a short line. It's important to understand the rating. Now, this is not as much of an issue today as it maybe was 15 or 20 years ago, but there are weight restrictions on some rail lines. Most rail cars are loaded with a lading weight, meaning the weight of the rail car and the weight of the product in the rail car, to up to 286,000 pounds. So is the line rated for 286K? Are there any weight restricted bridges on the route if you're moving a heavy product? How many trains are on the line today? Is it only local service, or are you running 100 trains a day out there? And believe it or not, just because may have a ton of service, that may or may not be good for you. If you're trying to get local service on a line that has 100 trains a day, you might have a harder time getting a frequent service. So it's something that you ought to know. Positive train control is a signaling and communication system that is really only relative to if you're shipping hazardous materials and things like that. Does the railroad have any plans for your that line in the future? If you're going to build a plant on there that's going to be there for 50 years, you want to make sure that the rail line's going to be there for 50 years. So have a conversation. In most cases, that's not going to be a problem, but it needs to be a question that's asked. Now, this is an issue that comes up a lot, and it doesn't get talked about enough. But is just because your site is on rail, does it mean that the road crosses the rail to get into the site? Is that something you want? Is that something you don't want? Is that going to be a problem? Does it have warning devices? They're going to want to know how often you're going to block that crossing. If a road access does not exist and you need to cross the railroad, will the railroad even allow that? In some places, the railroad's not going to allow that. In some places, they're going to ask you to close another crossing or two in the area to hopefully maybe add one more. It's important to have those conversations early with the railroads. These are questions that we ask the prospects, the consultants, that we need to know that can help us serve them more effectively. We first of all, as I mentioned before, we want to know, does it actually need rail? There's a lot of misconceptions around whether a project sometimes needs rail or needs not. There's a lot of RFPs these days that'll come out and say it's rail preferred. And I don't even know sometimes what that means, but rail preferred kind of means that they kind of like to have it, but it's not a requirement. Those are hard to deal with because as a railroad, you want to put projects on the sites that are going to use the rail. On the other hand, we just came out of a supply chain crisis, and there's a lot of companies that are thinking about what they're going to need to do over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so they may want to have the option for rail in the future. So that is a real issue that we're all dealing with. Obviously, is it inbound freight, outbound, or both? What am I moving? And this gets really complicated with some projects because obviously there's confidentiality and NDAs are signed and nobody wants to say what they're moving or what they're not moving. One easy way to deal with that is to say, how will the rail need to interface with the building or the site? Meaning, does the rail have to come into the building or outside the building? Is it a bulk product? Meaning, am I going to have a pit outside the building? Are you going to vacuum the product out of the rail car? Is your shipment going to roll on and roll off the rail car? Or do I need to fit it underneath a crane of some sort? So when am I going to start shipping? That's important for timing. Rail equipment. There's all types of rail equipment out there. Having an idea of what's out there is important. Dynamic and static, that gets into if we spot the rail cars in there and they're never going to move them, that's a static operation. If it's dynamic, then the customer is going to have some sort of a rail car mover that once we come into the site, they're going to physically actually move that rail car around in the property. Volumes, understanding those by day, by month, by year. Is there seasonality? Who's going to pay for the freight? That's always a good question to know. And are there future expansions planned? It's always easier to lay out the rail now rather than later because it's much, much harder to build rail into an existing facility if it's not been planned for. We have a database of sites. This is public. This is Zillow for rail sites, essentially. This is our website, but I'm sure all the other railroads have something similar. This is just a really easy location that you can go to and find information about NS sites. We do a lot of conceptual analysis and visualization. So basically, we can do these in a few days. We have a team of engineers, technical services experts that we can lay out a site. If you give us your CAD file or we'll create something, we can show you very quickly how the rail is going to look on the site, what it's going to, and how it's going to get in there. And then we can help you visualize that. This is a 3D rendering of a project that we did for an auto manufacturer to relocate some portions of their track in there. The question that everybody always wants to know is how much is it going to cost me to build it? Well, and these are all over the board, and I was reluctant to kind of put this out there, but at the same time, it's a reality, and everybody kind of wants to know. Generally, the mainline switch is going to be your biggest cost. That's going to be based on the signal. So on the low end, you're talking 250, but that's probably not many of those are left anymore. These days, most of them are anywhere from 350 upwards of $450,000 just for the switch. And then if you have to have a power switch, meaning that it's pushed by a button at some dispatcher somewhere, that can run upwards of $1.5 million or maybe more. So it's important to understand that. Most of the railroads own and maintain the mainline switch, and the industry will own and maintain from what we call the clear point, which is basically the point where trains can still pass by into the site. But that can vary and has varied in multiple instances around the industry. If you're going to have to split the track on your property, you're going to have an industry switch. So that has to be accounted for. And then track costs are generally quoted on a linear foot basis. That's a very broad range, but it's also important to note that doesn't include anything like grading, drainage, utilities, things like that, because those are very site-specific issues. Grade crossing certainly costs money. But really kind of the short answer is very few rail projects are done for less than $1 million. And that's a simple one to do. Every railroad is going to have a different answer for this question. Will you help us with the costs? In most cases, probably not, but you never know. And in some cases, it never hurts to ask. We can sometimes get creative with different ideas. It may not be upfront money. It may be in the form of a refund or something like that, but there are ways to creatively approach that. And I recommend that you encourage your customers to do that. What a lot of customers want to know, what's it going to cost me to move it? So to do that, we need origin, destination. We need to know actually what it is before I can actually tell you what it's going to cost. So that involves a commodity code called a standard transportation commodity code. We need to know the routing. This is all good information that we need to have in order to help you help your client. I'm going to get into just some highly technical stuff here. Not highly technical, but I want you to understand a little bit about how a railroad is built. So at the start of a rail line, you lay down a road bed, which is a sub-ballast, and it varies based on industry track, lead tracks, lead tracks are tracks inside of an industrial park that have a spur that come off of that, or main lines, and then they have to be compacted. Then you lay down the cross ties on top of the ballast. Those cross ties can be steel, wood, concrete, even some composites are out there. Steel is becoming more and more popular out there, especially on industry tracks. The cost of wood has gone up, and so they're much more popular than they used to be. Rail itself is measured by the weight of 1 yard of rail. So most rail is going to be in the neighborhood of about 132 pounds. 136 pound is mainline standard. There is rail out there under 100 pound. Norfolk Southern standard is we won't operate on anything less than 100 pounds. So if it's an old facility and it's got 85 pound rail, it's probably going to have to be replaced. Rail can be done in two ways: continuously welded. We do it in 1,440 foot linear foot sections. Those are generally for really big projects. For industry projects that are smaller, you're going to generally see jointed rail, and that rail moves in 39 foot pieces. On top of the rail, we put the ballast. The ballast is the rock you see, the large rocks on top of that. And every railroad, I'm sure, has a different standard for what type of ballast they like to see. This is NS's, and also there are different standards for whether it's an industry track, lead track, or main line. Switches are based on the angle that comes off the railroad. So a number 8 switch has a sharper angle, a bigger angle than a number 10, which has a bigger angle than a number 15, which has a bigger angle than a number 20. And those allow for greater speeds into and out of the site. Norfolk Southern will only put a number 10 in the main line at a minimum of a number 10. Some industries do have some number 8s in there. Anything less than that generally has to be replaced or changed. Curves, they matter. We generally operate around certain different curves and things like that. And to kind of a visualization of that, this is something I actually did for some friends here in Columbia. This is actually the State House in Columbia, an aerial view of it. you can turn a vehicle, your normal vehicle, around in say 25 feet. An 18-wheeler, you can turn that 18-wheeler around in 75 feet. But to turn a train, you need about 478.34 feet, which in this representation is basically the size of a city block. So when you're putting rail on a site, it is geometrically very restrictive, and it will always eat up more land than most people believe it's going to. So if you say, I need 5 acres for my rail serve project, you're probably going to need more. Grades matter. Cars and trucks can go up a 7 or 10% grade. Railroads are really limited to 2.5%, and frankly, that's even pushing it. In most places, we try not to exceed 2, and where the rail cars are unloaded will have to be at a 0% grade. So it's important to keep that in mind. As I mentioned earlier, sustainability is a huge part of what we are selling today. It is a big advantage that the railroads have. A lot of the foreign direct investment we are seeing, especially from Europe, they are putting a huge value on sustainable transportation. Your traditional site selection, when we interfaced with them, they wanted to know, okay, what's the freight rate and what's the transit time? Today, they want to know the freight rate and the transit time, and then they also want to know the tonnage of carbon for that move. So every company has a standard that they are putting on carbon. I recently worked on a project that placed a cost of $55 a ton on the carbon. So they added up the freight rate, they factored in their inventory carrying costs based on transit time, and then they added in the tonnage cost on the carbon to come up with a total landed cost. And it moves the needle on mode selection. So mode selection is whether they're going to go truck or rail or intermodal. And those are very important measurements. I think Matt mentioned earlier, I used to be a supply chain consultant for companies, and we did many studies. And one of the things that companies have to reconcile with is when they're doing a site search, the minute they decide where they're going, they put a pin in the map, their logistics costs are essentially locked in for about 80% of the number. You really can't change it. So when they make a decision on, I'm going to site A or site B or site C, their logistics costs can vary widely based on inbound freight and outbound freight. So it's important to keep those things in mind. Rail is tremendously more efficient than truck when it comes to carbon emissions. So to help you understand that, on our website, and I know other railroads have these too, is a carbon calculator. You can go out to the website, you can put in what it is you're moving, you can put in your volume of trucks and the weight, and then you can actually, if you have a price for carbon, you can put it in there. We have kind of a standard cost of $25 a ton. That's what carbon credits are generally trading for out there today. And then you can hit the button and it'll kick out a result that will tell you the exact metric tons of carbon by truck and then by rail. It'll compare the two. You can also go in and do intermodal and compare. In that way, it'll calculate your highway miles, your dray miles, your rail miles, and we'll be able to provide a opportunity for you to compare and contrast that. So these are kind of to be a resilient, operation-centric, customer-centric railroad, operations-focused and customer-centric railroad. You know, we are really focusing on sustainability. We're focusing on providing a great service product. And it's important for us to get involved early with a project. Is it? I'm sure every company will tell you that, and we all mean it. But we also understand that, you know, confidentiality matters, and those are things that we deal with every day. We have a team of people out there, and this is actually a graphic to just show you who maybe some of the people are in your territory. I'm sure you may know some of these people. Reach out to them. I highly recommend it. They can provide a lot of value in a meeting as far as helping your client or your project or your consultant understand how their product moves, because just it doesn't matter sometimes even whether they're even asking for rail. Every company needs to move something into and out of their facility, and rail is always an option, whether the rail is on the site or not. So think intermodal, think transload, think direct rail. These are all great tools and all available for you. So that is the end of my scheduled presentation. I'm certainly able and willing to take as many questions as y'all have. And I guess, Matt, I will stop sharing here and I can open it up for some questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Brian. A lot of great weeds there. Really, really great learning opportunity for me, and I'm sure our members too. But yeah, we have a few minutes here. We'd love to take some questions. If you have any, you can pop those in the chat. Brian will see those. You can also just give us a shout out too verbally if you'd like. So in the next few minutes, we'd love some questions here. And it's certainly okay if not. I know we covered a lot of ground here. So last call for any questions, maybe 10, 20 seconds here.
Well, I would like to recognize a couple of people that I see are on the call that I know have helped worked with me on stuff. Mike Grimm and Mary Beth Flournoy. Mike is one of our directors who handles Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, Tennessee, and that. Jake Weir's on the call. He's our ID manager in Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And then Mary Beth Flournoy is one of our directors. She handles South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. So they're certainly on the call, and I'm sure most of you know them or have met with them, and just wanted to give them a quick shout out. So I do have one question. So have you seen an uptick in activity for rail being part of a company's ESG strategy? Absolutely. So one of the things about sustainability that I did neglect to mention this. So you have different types of emissions. You have scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. And a lot of companies, over the last probably 10 years have really focused on scope 1. So scope 1 is the emissions that they are generating themselves. Scope 2 and scope 3 get into their supply chain. And so as companies are evaluating their supply chains, who should they buy their product for, how they decide what their distribution network is going to look like, all of those things come into focus. So every company is going to look at it differently. I won't sit there and tell you every company cares about carbon, because I've sat down with some that could care less. But certainly it is increasing, and these days, especially with the electric vehicle projects, battery projects, if they're coming in asking for renewable electricity, they care about carbon. Whether they know immediately to think about rail or not, that's my job to make sure that they think about rail as a sustainable form of transportation. So if you have rail served sites, you have an advantage in that regard. Anything else?
Good question, though. Thank you for that. We have a few more minutes. If you're thinking about any questions, we'd love to take those. I just want to thank you, Brian, for your leadership. Thank you for leading us at SEDC too. We've had such a great handful of months within our organization because of your leadership, and more importantly, we win in the South because of our economic developers and our partners. So thank you so much for your leadership in this region. Thank you for shouting out our friends as well from NS. You will very likely to see Brian and others from the team at our Meet the Consultant Site Selection Summit on April 30th to May 1st in Atlanta. This is where our membership and consultants and experts come together to discuss the acceleration of new economic development in the South. Also, let me give you a heads up for the next webinar that you have. Thank you, Emily. Thank you for your comment. Thank you for leading some of these as well. The next opportunity you have to join us virtually is November 14th for the housing webinar. So we'll be discussing housing development, developer attraction, and affordable housing throughout the region. Also, you probably noticed this session is recorded. So we will probably have this on our website before the end of the day. If not, then definitely tomorrow. Mackie Darius is pretty fast on these things. So please find this on our website or our YouTube channel and make it available to your partners as you see fit. So thank you so much, team. Thank you, Brian. I'll turn it to you to close it out, and really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you. And look forward to seeing everybody meet the consultants. And don't forget, annual meeting next summer in Savannah. It's going to be a great time. See y'all there. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brian.